Hello, my name is Omar Harami. Thank you for joining us for the first full Kumi Now online gathering, addressing a challenge we as Kumi Now haven't addressed before, the violations facing Palestinians in the business world. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook. If you do not wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We would also love it if you could quickly share the Facebook post on Facebook so that others may join. The link will be shared in the chat. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having everyone you will be seeing today introduce themselves. So Denise.
Hello.
Yes. Denise, can you please? Yes, please.
Denise Assad, Palestinian storyteller from the ruined village Caesarea, living now with my family in Haifa with the Israeli passport, unfortunately.
Thank you, Denise. Sam?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm Sam Bahour. I'm a Palestinian American, originally from Youngstown, Ohio. I've been in Palestine for the last 25 years. I came after the Oslo Accords were signed. And currently, I run my own consulting business called Applied Information Management, AIM.ps.
Thank you, Sam. And Nisreen?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Omar. My name is Nisreen Musleh. I'm Palestinian. I was born and raised in Palestine. I run my own business here in Palestine. It's called Ritaj. Ritaj means the Great Gateway. My business is in training and translation, and I will be speaking further about my experience in business in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisreen. So as it is the custom, we will be giving you a very brief news update of what's happening on the ground. Mark, can you give me permission? So I know almost everybody's attention is very much focused on what's happening in the US and what's happening globally with COVID-19, but there has been some certain developments in Palestine and Israel. Today, actually, Israel has recorded over 10,000 cases, which has been, I mean, this is a record high number of cases, especially that we've been, the people who are living inside Israel have been for 3 weeks under a certain kind of lockdown. So Israel is tightening the lockdown. Although Israel is doing the best job around the world with vaccination, the numbers are very scary and health officials are very worried. In Palestine, of course, the number of testing is very limited. But however, I mean, there has been a steady, the number of patients in hospitals has been steady. So the government is expected to further do more restrictions, but it's not guaranteed. Although Israel has already vaccinated over 70% of people who are over 60, and they're planning to start vaccinating people who are above 55 by this week, and also all of the people who are part of the education system. One of the most troubling things is that Palestinian prisoners, and most Palestinian prisoners are serving in Israeli political prisoners are serving time in Israeli jails inside Israel, and there's a very high number of cases inside among Palestinian of COVID-19 among Palestinian prisoners. The government still refuses or claims that it's Palestinian political prisoners are not at all on their priority list. Today, there was something that is really a game changer to a certain extent. Many of you who are following what's happening in Palestine and Israel know that we live under apartheid, similar to people in South Africa during the apartheid regime. But this is the first time Beit Salem, one of the major human rights organizations inside Israel, has really started to use the word apartheid, a term that most Israelis, even human rights defenders inside Israel, have really objected to to having this term used. Israel today announced over 100 new settlement, 100 units to be built inside settlements. The past week was close to 1,000 new permits, over 900 building. Israel has exposed plans for over 900 units to be built inside settlements. So this is a high record, not the highest this year. October alone had over 2,000 building units to be built inside settlements. Many people see that Israel is either benefiting of what's the big mess that is happening in the US right now, or they are really paying, they are trying to test the new Biden administration, especially when they have their hands full. Not that we have high hopes with Biden or anyone else, but this is a development. This is a very young Palestinian prisoner, Muhammad Salah ad-Din. He's from Hizma village. He was arrested 2 years ago, and while he was in prison, he started to feel certain pain, and he continued to complain for the Israeli authorities. Then they just discovered that, and they were not really paying any attention to him. Yesterday he passed away. He had cancer, and he's 20 years old. He died in Israeli. He was released from prison, but and many people are claiming that Israel is responsible because they have really delayed his treatment. So unfortunately, very sad news coming from Palestine and Israel at this time. So we have been thinking of doing something really, since we're starting Kumi 2.0, and today is actually officially our first session. We thought of doing something special, and we thought maybe why not to do a storytelling session. So we have our friend Denise Asad, and she will be sharing a Palestinian story. As much as we're gonna try to have these traditional Palestinian stories. She's a professional storyteller, and as much as we can, we're gonna try to connect our stories with the themes of the week. So today the theme is, or this week, the theme is doing business in Palestine. So we'll move to Denise. Denise, you are on silent, on mute.
Sorry. أهلا وسهلا. Welcome to anybody here. I am very, very glad to be with you, and I learned a bit about this bill from Omar. Thank you, Omar, for really let me join you. But I really want to make several words about our folk tales. Our folk tales, the UNESCO declare about them as treasure, yani world treasure, at 2005. And we really, even on our folk tale, we are fighting against the Israeli Academy, that they say that also they get it like the hummus, will falafel. It's also they are taking our folk tales. I was very lucky to have my father, Allah yarhamu, he passed away, and he was a storyteller. And this story is from his to his memory and from his memory. Once upon a time, in the most beautiful valley in Palestine, I think it's the most beautiful valley all over the world, Marj ibn Amir, the valley of Ibn Amir, that located between Jenin and Nazareth. Why there was no occupation, no mandat, no Turkish occupation, where people were very free to go around and travel all over Palestine. There was a cockerel. And everybody called him the roaring cockerel. And you will know later on why they gave him this name. One day, he was very, very hungry. He decided to go to the fields to search for food. He searched and searched and searched. He found a grain of wheat. Oh, he said, no, I need more than it. He continued his trip. He walked and walked and walked until he met a hajji, an old woman, graining her wheat with the jarushi, the old machine. It's not machine, that it's 2 stones. She was graining her wheat. Sabah al-khair, good morning. Sabah al-nur. Take this grain of wheat. Thank you, cockerel. I have no time for thanks. He went for a while and came back. Where is my grain of wheat? Your grain of wheat? I put it with my wheat and grain of wheat, and I grain it together, and I get flour. Ha! I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the fields searching for food. I found grain of wheat, and a grain of wheat for handful of flour. The old woman had no choice. This is like very noisy, roaring cockerel. She gave him the handful of flour. He continued walking. He walked and walked and walked. He reached a baker. Salamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam. Take it, please, the handful of flour. Thank you, dear cockerel. No time for thanks. And he went for a while, came back. Where is my handful of flour? What were you gave it to me? And I made a dough and I prepared a Arabic bread, the flat bread. Oh, I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the field searching for a food. I found grain of wheat, a grain of wheat for a handful of flour, a handful of flour for bread. The baker had no choice. He gave him the bread. The cockerel continued his walk. He walked and walked and walked. He reached a farmer collecting green onions. Al-Afi, Allah yafik yadik. Take this bread. Oh, thank you. No time for thanking. And he went hide behind a rock beside the field. He watched the farmers eating the bread. When they finished eating, he came back. Where is my bread? What was, we ate it. Oh, you ate my bread. I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the field searching for a food. I found grain of wheat for a handful of flour, a handful of flour for bread, a bread for green onions. They have no choice. They gave him the onions and let him go for his walk. He walked and walked and walked. He reached a group of women putting honey in jars. Masal khair, good evening. Masal nur, take these green onions. Oh, thank you. No time for thanks. I am busy, cockerel. And he went and hid and watched them until they finished the last green onion. He came back to them. Where is my green onions? We ate it. Balla. I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the field searching for food. I found grain of wheat for handful of flour for a bread for green onions for honey jar. They have no choice. He's such a noisy. They gave him the honey jar. He continued walking. He walked and walked and walked until he met a shepherd with goats and sheep. يعطيك العافية, Allah يعافيك. Take this jar of honey. Oh, thank you. No time for thanks. I have a lot of things to do. He went as usual, hide behind a tree, watched the shepherd finishing the honey. He went back. Where is my honey? Your honey? I ate it. You gave it to me. No, I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the fields searching for food. I found a grain of wheat for full handful of flour, handful flour for a bread for green onions, green onions for jar of honey for a sheep. No, but he had no choice. Such a noisy cockerel. He gave him the sheep. The cockerel continued his trip. He walked and walked and walked until he met a people reacting very, very strange for him. They were singing ويا شمس غيب من السماء وعلى الأرض طلع عنا عريس ويا حرامي اقرا الفاتحة وعلى روحك وتشهدي. Excuse me, he asked. A woman was standing there. You are like my sister. Can you tell me, those people get crazy? No, you are not a Palestinian cockerel. Probably you are a spy. No, I am Palestinian cockerel. I am from here, from the valley. And my grandfather, for years and hundreds of years, I am from this valley. And you don't know that it is the groom party in Al-Aris? So where is the groom's mother? There she is, a very, very happy woman because she successed to get him married with her nephew. مبروك يا ام العريس. Best regards in the groom's mother. Take this sheep. Oh, thank you. No time for thanks. He left them, went and hid as usual behind the house, watched them eating all the meat from the sheep. He came back. Where is my sheep? We ate it with our guests. No. Why? You gave it to us. No. I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the field searching for food. I found you can talk with me. Follow me. I found a grain of wheat for handful of flour. Handful of flour for a bread, pita bread أو كماجي إحنا بنقول ريف for green onions for jar of honey for a sheep and sheep for a big cow. I can see it from here. The groom's mother, she was really very wise and she can't make such a big disaster with this cockerel with all the guests. She decided to give him the cow and قالت له الله يرضى عليك, go away from here. Imagine a cockerel going around with the cow behind him. He arrived to another group of people who were singing, but not the same songs. They were singing والليلة حين العرايس يا سلام سلم والليلة حين العرايس يا سلام سلم وقاويها واسم الله عليكي وحدي وقاويها والتاني تنتين وقاويها والتالتي خرزي زرقاء وترد عن العروس العين. He asked a woman who was there, this is another groom's party? No, it's the bride party. It's Hinna al-Arus. You are not a Palestinian cockerel. You are a spy. No. I am from here, from the valley. I am a real Palestinian cockerel. Where is the bride's mother? There she is. She is looking very sad. He went to her. Mabruk, best regards. Gave her the cow. Thank you. No time for thanks as usual. Thanks as usual. He hid until they finished eating. He came back and asked for his cow. The bride mother said, but we ate it with our guests. No. Excuse me. I am the roaring cockerel. I went to the field searching for food. I found a grain of wheat for handful of flour for a bread for green onions. Green onions for jar of honey for a sheep for a cow, and a cow for the bride's crown. The mother had no choice. She asked her daughter, the bride, to give her the crown, and she put the crown on the cockerel head. And since then, all the cockerels and roasts all over the world have this comb on their head. And our cockerel, the roaring cockerel, continue his trip singing, وين عرم الله وين عرم الله وانت يا مسافر وين عرم الله. I told you my story and put it in your heart. And I hope you love it as I do. And a little device or little, if you want this story to be real in your heart, tell this story today to someone you love or you like and you care. And good night. And الله يعطيكم العافية.
Allah يعطيكي Denise. Thank you so much.
أهلا.
Thank you. We will now move to Sam Bahur.
Thank you, Omar. I can't beat Denise's story, nor do I know how to sing, but I'll do my best in talking about business problems in Palestine. Thank you, Denise. Again, thanks everyone for being here. What I would like to do in the short time that we have is to talk a little bit about my role in what I faced in trying to work in the Palestinian economy. But I always feel it's wrong to take an individual's experience and make it the story. The story, as Denise just gave us an example, always has context. And the context of the business story in Palestine actually has, I would say, 5 different phases. So when we're talking about business in Palestine, the first question I have to ask is, in what period are we talking? Are we talking about pre-State of Israel, where Palestine had an economy, had all the culture and arts, the groves of olives and the groves of oranges in Jaffa, which have become a global product? There was a live, thriving community here. And that's a period of time that people kind of forget, because we start with the conflict and go forward, forgetting that there was a life before the conflict. The second period of time for the Palestinian economy was between 1948, when Israel was established, and I would say 1967. At that point, the Palestinians inside the State of Israel, what became the State of Israel, became subjects of the Israeli economy and society, but with very clear discrimination, not casual discrimination, like many countries have, but martial law. They couldn't move from one place to the other inside the country without permits. And that kind of heavy-handed repression. At that period, between 1948 and 1967, the Palestinians in the occupied territory were actually linked to an administrative body in Jordan. So they were not part of a country called Jordan, but they were overseen by an administrative body from Jordan. So they were like in limbo in a way. And then we have the period, what I would call the third phase, which is from 1967, when the occupation started in the occupied territory. And I would go actually all the way until the Oslo Accords were signed. That period of time, although not stable by any imagination, I mean, any stretch of the imagination, there were ups and downs, but there was no wall between the occupied territory and the State of Israel. So this was a fluid community going in and out, including myself when I used to come and visit, put myself in a car and drive to the sea, no problem. During that period of time, from this 1967 to the Oslo Accord, the main source of economy here was actually about 200,000 day laborers, Palestinians, who would go into the Israeli economy in agriculture and construction and the hotel industry, etc., and come back at night, sleep in their homes in the occupied territory, wake up in the morning and go back to their workplaces. No wall, no checkpoints, or at least no permanent checkpoints. So that basically was a core of about 200,000 workers who were bringing in hard currency, better salaries than the local economy had, given there wasn't really a developed local economy yet. It was all a subservient economy to the Israeli economy. And then came the Oslo Accord. And in 1993, when these accords were signed, there were a lot of upbeat thinking. Although people like me who were politically active before the Accords were signed understood very well, because I half jokingly say that I'm one of 12 Palestinians worldwide that actually read the Accords before coming here. So I knew that the Oslo Accords did not end the military occupation. However, it did reshuffle the occupation enough for even me to be convinced that there was an opening that we might be able to benefit our people here by getting involved in. And those accords are where I would like to focus. But before that, let me just finish the framing. So the Oslo Accords, I would say, would go from 1993 to only around 1995, if you want to stretch it, maybe year 2000. After Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister who signed those accords with Yasser Arafat, was assassinated by a Jewish terrorist inside Israel, from that point until today, we've been on a very slippery downward slope. And we can get to that later. So after the assassination of Rabin, 1995, until today, is the period of time where I would call it's put us into a survival mode, a serious survival mode in the last 4 years. Because as we were in this survival mode, trying to figure out how do we deal with a peace process that failed and didn't bring about an independent state or an economy that can be independent, at the same time, we got Donald Trump as president of the US, who came and said, not only are we going to keep you in survival mode, but we're going to extinguish anything to do with national aspirations for the Palestinian people, including economic. And I don't have to go through the long list of things that Trump did to us, specifically to the Palestinian struggle, him and his administration. And that put us to where we are today, which is, just to make the full circle, during the year 2000, when things went out of hand here after the Camp David Accords failed, it was a last-ditch effort that Clinton tried to bring the parties together to strike a peace deal in Camp David. That didn't work, and after that, we all know what happened. The second Intifada broke out. And then the Prime Minister of Israel at that time, who was a very bloody-handed, very, very aggressive military person, Ariel Sharon, basically announced something major. It's actually the first major policy announcement that came out of Israel. He said, we are going to separate from the Palestinians in the occupied territory. Up until now, up until year 2000, 2003, the idea Israel had was to incorporate us, to serve their economy, but not to be political subjects, not to have national aspirations. But then Sharon came and said, after the Intifada, he said, we are going to separate you there and we here. And the wall that we see, the separation wall, is one aspect of a policy of separation. Part of that separation was to separate our economy from theirs. Now, there's many reasons that can be spoken about, but what he said is that in a couple years, I want to see 0 workers from the occupied territory coming into Israel. And if you recall, that's when Israel started to import Far East and other workers from the Asian area to come and work to replace the Palestinian workers. And those workers from China and Thailand and all over the places, they were dying for work, for they came running. And Israel opened the doors. Interesting, it opens the doors for those workers, but doesn't open the doors for Palestinian refugees who are also dying literally to come back home. And those foreign workers came into the Israeli market and they were let go on the construction sites. They never built with stone before. So they didn't have the skill set needed to build with stone, which is what we build with here. The farming community accepted these foreign workers with open arms. And the foreign workers would come to the groves and take the carnation and snip it from the root. And the owners of the farms were going crazy. It's like, what are you doing? That's not how you snip a carnation. You snip in the middle, so it comes back and grows the next season. So all of a sudden, the Israeli economy started to take a very significant efficiency hit because the Palestinian workers who, for them, this was natural work, it's part of their natural habitat, were removed from the Israeli economy. When Sharon failed in his policy of separation, today, interestingly enough, ironically enough, we have about 200,000 workers that are going back into Israel every day to work. The only difference is now there's a wall and checkpoints, so they need to get permits to be able to do so. So all Israel did in the last 20 years is take a free moving labor force and apply a security restriction onto them to make sure that they have full control of who goes in and who goes out. Last thing I'll say is a little bit about my part of all this. As I said, I came during the Oslo Accord, right after it was signed. And I actually came to implement one section of the Oslo Accords. It was article number 36, which was the telecommunications article. And it basically said, in a nutshell, the first sentence was, I couldn't have written it better myself. It was great. It said the Palestinian side has the right to build, operate, and maintain separate and independent, two important words, telecommunication networks. So I came with the private sector investors who wanted to invest in this sector to do that. And when we hit the ground running, we learned through the Oslo process, and definitely today, where there is no Oslo process, there's only heavy-handed Israeli military supported by the US, that they never ever had the intention to allow the Palestinians to establish separate and independent networks. And I'll give three very quick examples. All of us know what 3G is on our mobile phones. I'm almost embarrassed to speak about it because the world has reached 4G and 5G. We got 3G on our telephones almost about 2 years ago. It took 12 years to negotiate with the Israeli side and to create a global campaign to get Israel to release the frequencies above our head in the West Bank to allow the company that I helped build introduce 3G services on our telephones. Interestingly, today, that's only allowed in the West Bank, and it's a limited amount of frequency, so we don't have a very good signal. It is not allowed for the Gaza Strip even until today. Secondly, throughout Oslo, and definitely today, Israel controls everything that we import. And one of the things it does not allow us to import is some specific telecommunication equipment that would allow us to build an independent telecommunication network. In the telecom industry, they call that the gateway. Every country has one or more gateways. It is your connection to the world. If you have a gateway, it means that you have financial interest every time a call is made. When I call you in the US, our gateway would speak to the gateway in the US and there would be a financial settlement. Without giving us a gateway, we're just part and parcel of the Israeli network. That's why today in Palestine, our area code in Ramallah and Nablus and even Gaza is part and parcel of the numbering plan that Israel has. So they can control all the equipment and they can delay all the equipment that comes in. The third example I'll give, the last one, even though Israel committed in writing during the Oslo process that it will not allow its companies, its Israeli companies, to serve the Palestinian market, what Israel does to get around that is it permits all the Israeli companies to establish telecommunications infrastructure in the illegal settlements, which are placed on all the mountaintops, which has perfect coverage to cover the entire occupied territory without any environmental oversight from the Palestinian regulator, without any taxation to the Palestinian treasury, without any access other than putting up airwaves and giving us our own airwaves and making us pay for it. So 3 examples, and I can give you many more, of the way that the occupation through Oslo and after had no intention to allow Palestinians to build a different reality on the ground. And I would end by saying, they may have given us, Trump's administration specifically, a damaging hit. We've been struggling for the last couple of years, and then COVID came to make it even worse. But we're not out of this game. If anybody thinks that 4 years of Trump is going to push the Palestinian struggle of the last 100 years aside, has not read history. Trump will be in jail rotting, I hope, and the Palestinian struggle will be moving closer to freedom and independence. And I'll end by just pointing you to the New York Times article today, where David Friedman, the US, sometimes it's hard to remember that he's the US ambassador in Israel. Sometimes I think he's the Israeli ambassador in Israel. He was interviewed because he's outgoing now. When Biden comes, Biden is going to appoint someone else as the ambassador. So this outgoing ambassador, this material settlement supporter, gave a long interview. And there's that article in the New York Times. And then there was excerpts that were not put in the article, but the writer, David Hellenberger, I'm sorry, I think David Hellenberger was his name. The writer of that article said, well, these are very important snippets. And I want people who are students and people who are interested in this to hear everything that the ambassador said. So he put 2 threads on Twitter and put all the things which were not incorporated in the article in those threads. I highly recommend you to read the article and the 2 threads to get a full view of the kind of ambassador that the US had in Israel. Just to give you one point, and I'll end on this. They asked him, are you going to move to Israel? What a question to a US ambassador. I thought he was going back to the US. And his answer was even more shocking. He said, yes, I'm going to go back. I'm not interested to be an Israeli yet. I want to wait 4 more years because I may want to come back to be a politician. If that's not dual loyalty, I don't know what is. And I'll stop there and we can take questions later.
Thank you very much, Sam. And now we turn to Nisreen.
Thank you, Omar, Sam, and Denise. I'm going to try to combine between telling a story and talking about business in Palestine. Just to start a little bit before I started my business, I like to point out that I actually was an employee. I was a teacher before I ran into the business world. And the reason why I stopped being an employee and went to the business world is actually the separation wall. It's because there was the second intifada that started breaking out, the uprising, if I may say. And because of that, I was not able to continue going, crossing the checkpoints and going to my work. So I decided to quit. Luckily, it was a good decision for myself because I had the opportunity to explore the business world in Palestine. This was 17 years ago, in 2002, 2003. And now I am the owner of a training and translation company that is located in Ramallah. Stepping from the teaching world into the business world is not an easy thing at all. I'm sure that changing this line of business is risky, and it needs a lot of management skills. And this is what I have learned throughout my experience. Luckily, with the Intifada, and it was almost the end of the Intifada, it kind of gave us the opportunity to see the potential of the training business in Palestine, particularly training that comes with international standards. At that time, the donor community and projects were coming into Palestine along with the peace process. And with that, a certain set of skills were needed for the local community. And therefore, in my company, we started stepping in and introducing internationally accredited certifications into the local market. This was a good breakthrough for my work, and I started it in 2007, and we continue until now. And we also introduce new topics because we feel like we are all the time we are in a state building mode. So we try to build the skills and build the competencies and the capacities for people to advance with their walks of life in the business world. So throughout this process, I think I will highlight 3 achievements. The first achievement for myself throughout these 17 years is being a woman that is not affiliated with a traditional profession. So over here, unfortunately, what is being promoted or featured is women with home economy businesses, or women with traditional crafting or knitting or whatever. So this was a first achievement for me, that at least I am a woman in the world of business, the aggressive world of business, but still introducing something that is different and trying to shape a different reality for the training. Fortunately, in the recent years, I would say that this is also changing. It's not only for crafting, but also for the IT. So now we see more women affiliated and engaged in the technology world. So back then in 2005-06, we discovered that there is a potential for lines of businesses that would build the capacities, whether institutional or individual. And this was the main focus of my work, and this was my main engagement in the business. Unfortunately, and we heard right now from Sam how fragile the economy was throughout these years, particularly that I stopped because of the separation wall, but also in the past 4 years, which is the Trump administration, I would literally translate that the business over here dried out, because we really depend on so many elements in the market, and one of them is having the projects and having the development projects and the humanitarian projects around here. So even though I'm in the private sector, but still I get affected when such things, or when the political aspect plays a role in the community or in Palestine. As a survival mode, I would say a second achievement was facing the challenges in Palestine. I would call this as an achievement for myself. And I would want to highlight three key challenges that I faced throughout the 17 years. The first one is the occupation. And I want to address it from my own experience in my own business. How did the occupation hinder the progress or the development process in my field? Very simple. I could not import books. I could not receive them in my office. I had to send them to Jerusalem or to an address that I'm not there inside Israel, because I cannot get them to Ramallah in Palestine. So this was something that I did not really realize it, but eventually it's identified under the obstacles of the occupation. Another thing that I faced is getting international expertise to give training courses, because one of our line of business is to have internationally accredited certification and courses. Then we would need international trainers, and if a trainer lives in a certain country, then I cannot have them come here or fly them in order to deliver the training. And the countries they are not that far. So I'm talking about trainers from Jordan or from Egypt. They cannot come to Palestine to deliver a training. So these are some of the examples of the obstacles that I have faced throughout the business, and it kind of shaped the way I think of business. Of course, right now with the COVID-19, and so the whole scene has changed for connecting with international expertise and knowledge, but this was the case back then. Another challenge was the lack of coordination between the three main parties that affect our work over here, which is the government and the private sector and the donor community. So the public sector, private sector, and donor community. There was a little bit of what's the word, chaos in terms of addressing the training scene over here in Palestine. And this caused a challenge for me at work. And the last thing that I faced in terms of challenges is the purchase power. It's really affected by the politics. So, and to give an example, so we serve the corporate sector, and we serve also the individuals who want to invest in their capacities and in their skills. Now, the minute something happens, immediately training does not become a commodity, and then people would think 3 or 4 times before they invest in their capacity. And whenever there is a problem, now the COVID, before it the Trump administration, before it is the closure between cities, and so all these would affect our work immediately, and it affects the purchase power for the whole Palestinians at large. So these are some of the challenges that I personally faced in my business, and I think they were addressed or highlighted or labeled in a different way from my colleague's speech. Survival mode, yes, I totally agree. And this is another achievement, that we do exist under survival mode, and we can impact other people under this mode. Only yesterday, I received a 25-year-old young woman, professional. She's a nutritionist, and she was exciting because with all these obstacles, with all these hindrances, she still has an idea to start her own business within the Palestinian market, within the local economy, within all the frustrations, within all the people in prison, people being killed, all these things that really affect us indirectly. Still, she has a very bright idea of starting her business and serving the health sector here in Palestine, and I really encouraged her. So these are my 3 main achievements throughout my business. It's impacting, it's facing the challenges, and it's also being a woman affecting people in a different way. This is what I have to share as my experience, and I'm open for questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nasreen. I would like to, there's the first question that we have in the chat. I think it is for you, Sam. What kind of internet does Gaza have?
Good question. We have, like everything that the Oslo Accords allowed us to do, it said that all connectivity to the outside world, whether physical, and for those of you who came here know that you can't get to us unless you enter through an Israeli airport or border, and then maybe through a few checkpoints. Same exact thing applies to our internet and wireless communication. So first point is, everything that we actually connect to outside is going through Israel. And with all the security mindset that Israel has, and they're using us as a laboratory as well to test all their technologies, we have this middleman in between us. Having said that, there are, the company that I helped create was the first company, and today it's the largest ISP as well. But today there's, I think, around 12 ISPs, internet service providers, that are taking mostly their main connection from Paltel, the Palestinian telecommunications company, the fixed line company here. And we give probably better penetration rate than most of the Arab world. Remember, this is a very small area geographically. So where we're able to give connectivity, I think when let me give you an example. When we took over the telecom company from the Israeli military, there were about 220,000 people waiting for a fixed line in their home. A fixed line, you remember those things that used to go like this? That's what they were waiting for. 220,000 in 1995. It took us less than a year to bring that down to a few thousand. Why weren't they getting service? Not because the equipment wasn't there. Actually, Israel was dumping all of its technology on us because we were paying for it through our taxes. So they loved when we would be the first area to use their technology because, number one, we had no say-so. It was the Israeli military that bought the equipment from Israeli suppliers and tested it on us. So we have a very digital network from the first day we started. They weren't giving connectivity because they were using it like they used every aspect of our life as a means to coerce the society. So if you want a telephone in your home, come talk to us. Tell us what your neighbor's doing. Do this for us, do that for us, and maybe we can get you a telephone faster than the 10-year waiting list. That's the kind of method that the Israelis use, and even till today in different shapes or forms. So we do have an internet connectivity throughout most of the West Bank. Maybe there are a few pockets of the rural areas that don't. In Gaza, the same applies, because the company Paltel that I helped create established itself. Actually, I established the office in Gaza and proliferated their services there and still operate today. But the Palestinian government has a telecom ministry, and thankfully that ministry opened up the market for more companies to compete. So we have many companies competing in the internet service. So we have rather good internet service, and I would say it's a function of us being part and parcel of this Israeli network as well.
Thank you. We have a question. What's the size? How many billions is the Palestinian economy?
Palestinian economy is a $14 billion economy. That sounds like a lot for such a small community. It's not. It's tiny in what it should be. Let me give you an example of one of the sectors that paid the price of Israeli land confiscation and water confiscation. When I first arrived in 1995, the agricultural sector in the occupied territory contributed 12% to the GDP. Today, it contributes 3%, actually a little bit less than 3%. Why was that sector hit so hard? Because agriculture is based on 3 things: land, water, and movement of products. Those 3 things are core to this conflict. Land, of course, and we saw that when the threat to annex the Jordan Valley, which is our breadbasket, it actually takes the land. If it doesn't take the land per se, it is confiscating and controlling the water. The Palestinian water reservoirs, the natural aquifers, are actually in the mountain ridge. It's exactly where those big settlement blocks sit. So it wasn't haphazard that Israel decided to build big settlements where they are. They're actually sitting on top of our water. And then Israel allows the Israeli water company called Makarot to come into those settlements, set up pumping stations to not only give the settlers their water, but also to sell us back our water at a 4 to 5 times increase in price. So that's the size of the economy in one sector that I can give an example of how it was damaged.
Thank you, Sam. I have another easy question for you. How easy is it for the business sector in Palestine to operate under 2 governments in Gaza and in the PA? And the other section of the question is, how easy is it for Palestinians to market their products domestically, given that the West Bank is in A, B, C, East Jerusalem is behind the wall, and Gaza and the West Bank are not connected?
I'll answer the second one first. The movement of products or people throughout the occupied territory, we're not talking about exporting, we're talking about moving a product from Jaffa, from Qalqilia to Ramallah. It's a function of the day. Are there settlements? Is there settler violence? Right now, there's a lot of settler violence happening between Nablus and Ramallah. So a lot of the trucks stop coming in the morning because they get stoned or shot at by the settlers, which are protected by the Israeli military. So it's really a function of the day. Some days, trucks of produce, for example, or other products can go from any area to any area and basically go through some physical present checkpoints that are there, stationary checkpoints, which are always there, but they'll just get passed right through. Other days, to move a truck from the north of the West Bank to the south of the West Bank possibly could not happen, depending on which checkpoints have been closed. So that's the movement and access is a hard one to answer because it's a function of the day. There's an organization called PAL Trade, which is the Palestinian Trade Export Association. They made a calculation a couple of years ago for one factory, I think it was in Hebron, that for them to send their product to the north of the West Bank, and this is when there was around 600 checkpoints in the West Bank that Israel created, for them to move a product from Hebron to the north of the West Bank would be more expensive than them moving the same amount of product from Hebron to Hong Kong. And they did all the calculations. So you can imagine, to be a manufacturer here is a heavy, risky business. That's why people go to Nisreen's company to get risk management and project management. We are one of the best risk management managers in the world because we live a highly risk environment. In terms of the first question, it's not so easy. Let me give you an example. And the question is, how is it to work under 2 governments? We're actually working under more than 2 environments. Depending on what we want to talk about. Let's talk about currency. If I take out my wallet right now and show you what I have in it, it's going to have dollars, it's going to have dinars, and it's going to have shekels. So right there, I have 3 different environments I have to work with. And me coming from the US, I have to calculate all of that into dollars and then recalculate it back into whatever I'm buying. So I'm sure I'm losing with every transaction. If we're talking about land sales, most land sales and big ticketed items are bought in Jordanian dinar, mainly because people don't want to register in their contracts that they're using an Israeli currency. Our day-to-day currency, what we buy our falafel sandwiches and cola with, is the shekel. So currency is an issue by itself. If we talk about as a business, the legal environment that we're working in, I'm in the West Bank, so I'm working under the company law, which is actually a law from 1964 when Jordan was in charge of the West Bank. It has not been updated yet, but the Palestinian Authority adopted it. So there's a Palestinian law that I have to abide to, but its origins are a Jordanian law. That 1964 law was probably updated 10 times in Jordan, so it's more modern in Jordan. Ours got stuck in history. But if I'm buying a piece of land, then there's some Ottoman laws that apply. So I'm actually going before Israel was even created and before the British mandate, and I have to look at, for example, we have something here called the tabo, which is what we would call in the US, the final deed, the title to land. The tabo is actually a mechanism from Turkish times. So I have to work with Turkish law, Jordanian law, Israeli military orders, Palestinian West Bank law, and if I want to do business like the telecom company does business in the West Bank and in Gaza, I have to then follow whatever Hamas has created in terms of changes to the company law there. Can you imagine? I mean, if you're a business person in the US, it's hard enough to understand one set of laws to follow. Here we have to follow half a dozen, and not following them can either get you a fine or get you in jail, depending on who you violated.
Thank you. There's a question for you, Nesreen. Could you please explain how did you try to adapt with the changes of COVID-19 with the trainings?
It was actually not easy to adapt because some 3-4 years ago we tried to test the market to offer some online trainings, and surprisingly the Palestinian market is not really in favor of online. We are a lot about being friendly and networking and connecting with each other. So offline or remote was not really accepted. I tried actually twice in 2011 and 2013. Now that we are forced to use the online mode or the online as a tool, first of all, there are 2 aspects. The first is that the infrastructure is not stable. Just before I joined this meeting, I had a training online, and there was a lot of complications. Some people would lose the power. The electricity would black out of the blue. In some areas in Palestine, more than the other, the electricity is not stable. And the other thing is the internet. Not all areas in Palestine have solid or stable internet connection. So this adds to the whole issue of being forced to shift to the online world, if I may say. And the other thing is that people are not used to it, and I don't think they are prepared for it. And with this forcing, especially with the universities and schools, there's a negative reaction to it. So people are not really excited about being online. Neither do they try to, learn or understand or focus. Until today, we are really facing issues with online, offline, come to the company, be in a hall, or stay away for your health and safety. This has affected the business a lot. I mean, there's like a severe drop down in the number of registrations for in my company particularly. I'm really hoping that, and aiming and planning that it will pick up a little bit better. Also, in both paths or in both directions, online and offline, And this is what we are promoting right now, that this is the new reality, that we are the new normal that we are facing, and we just need to cope with it. Hopefully this year will be a little bit easier than 2020 for us business-wise.
Inshallah.
We should also mention, Nasreen and I are both in the West Bank. The situation in the Gaza Strip is 100 times worse. For 15 years, they've been living with 8 hours electricity on and 8 hours off. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but that's the average. So you can imagine somebody trying to develop themselves professionally or build a business, knowing that you're not going to have electricity for only 8 hours at a time. If you're 15 years old today in Gaza, you don't know what it means to have 24/7 electricity because you never witnessed it in your life. Something to keep in mind for the relative change.
If I may add to that as well, not only on this level, but also on doing business in Gaza, it's not really that easy. It's not easy to connect. It's not easy to be there. Even if you want to transfer money, let's say that you are working with someone over there remotely, a translator maybe, there is no direct way to transfer the wages or the money directly to a person living in Gaza. So whenever we are approached and being asked if we are able to serve in both the West Bank and Gaza, we really think twice whether we want to do it or not, because the hassle around it is way more than expected.
And remember, 40% of our population under occupation is in Gaza. So if I'm in the West Bank, I don't have access to 40% of my potential clients. If I'm in Gaza, a business, I don't have access to 60% of my clients in the West Bank.
Yes.
Thank you. Another question, how do you view international investors who are divesting, or I would add, or not divesting from companies that are complicit in human rights violation against the Palestinian people?
How I would view the ones who are not divesting? I think
the original question is the people who are divesting. I've added from my own, I took the liberty.
Okay. I think it's important to look at a couple of things here. First, divestment, like boycott and like sanctions, are tools, non-violent tools, to hold Israel accountable. So I don't think there's anything wrong, just the opposite. I think using any non-violent means to hold Israel accountable for what it's doing is welcomed. In the business community, I once wrote an article that said, divest, but invest. So don't only divest from Israel, turn that money around and put a little bit of it at risk inside the occupied territory, knowing that we need help and support. And actually, more than money, we need markets. Nasreen and I are on, I just finished my term. I think Nasreen is still on the board. We created a company. I was actually co-founder of an organization, not a company, called Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. And Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy is saying, listen, you can boycott, you can divest, and you can sanction. Those are all good. But you can also engage our community by helping the business community. Don't only help, don't give us charity, but help by opening up doors for us to businesses in the States who might want to buy our products. Or better yet, come forward, adopt a relationship with a Palestinian company, and make your fortune or your career by marketing a Palestinian product in your local community or in your region in the US. So there's many ways to not only hold Israel accountable, but also the other side of the coin is to support as much as possible. And the less handouts and the more real business means the more sustainable engagement. And that's why I'm on the business side of things, because I think that's what creates a sustainable path forward. So handouts can only do so much and can only go so far. Ultimately, I want people to be engaged in livelihoods that are dignified and add value to the building of a state, because that's what we're actually doing.
Thank you very much, Sam and Nasreen. We're approaching we're actually over the 1 hour planned for this session. But I would like to say that our Kumi action for this week, we're encouraging people to buy from Palestinian online shops. We are recommending during the Kumi actions to buy the kufi. which is the Palestinian scarf, but you could buy anything. We have a list. We've sent it already to you on the newsletter. There's a very interesting new website that or a number of websites that are out there. I'm not going to promote one, but promoting them all. So even if it's share it with friends, encourage people to buy, even for $2 or $5 worth of products. This would give a boost and a message of solidarity to our people. I am, in addition to thanking, of course, Denise, Nisreen, and Sam, would like to remind you that next week we're speaking about building permit discrimination, mainly in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, and areas C in the West Bank. So we have Jeff Halper and other wonderful speakers who will be with us. I hope you would share this information and help us promote Kumi so the numbers go up. And thank you all for a wonderful session, and thank you for your solidarity.
Thank you, Omar. Omar, I'm going to put into the chat, I wrote an article, which is a book review of Jeff Halper's last book that's coming out this week, in case anybody wants to see it.
And Sam is also a wonderful publisher of many articles. I don't read everything that is out on Palestine, but when Sam writes, I do invest the time and I follow what Sam is writing always.
Thank
and
you.
Sometimes I really comment with negative comments or positive comments, which is very welcoming. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.